Welcome to Fantasy Focus. Today's podcast is presented by Geico. You can watch us every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on ESPN's Twitter, plus the ESPN Fantasy Facebook page and YouTube feeds, as well as the ESPN app. And you can download Fantasy Focus wherever you get your podcast. Field, Mike, Daniel, and Stefan, you're here today as we get ready for Thursday Night Football. Week 2 is the Washington football team and the New York Giants. We're going to talk about wide receiver, cornerback matchups, some health updates, and some rankings chatter as well. Mike, good to have you back. How are you doing this morning?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. Exhausting week. Post-week one is always the toughest of the year because, we speculate all offseason. We read reports. We maneuver for injuries and information. But week one comes, and the coaches can't lie to us anymore. They put it all their cards on the table. We see how personnel is deployed, and we have to read and react to that. So it's been a busy, exhausting week, but I'm ready to roll for the season now.
You are now ready to roll. That is good news. Stefan Bell, we start off by saying good morning to you, and we're going to get right into some news. As Odell Beckham Jr., there's been an injury update or a status update for week 2. What do we know about OBJ, who did not play in week 1?
Well, we know that he's not going to play in week 2. Kevin Stefanski is saying that he's already been ruled out. And I think everybody's scratching their heads a little bit. If you go back to how Odell was looking, even before training camp, I mean, in the summer, we were hearing about him looking good, doing some route running when OTAs were happening. And then training camp, he was reportedly making great progress, although we didn't see him involved in practice. But you just felt like that was coming. And even the local reporters were saying how much work they expected him to get in week 1. There was an expectation that he was going to play week 1. So we were surprised when not only did he come in as questionable, but then it was a game time decision. And the wording at the time for Sunday was they were going to warm him up and see how he felt. Tells me that there's a bit of a confidence issue as far as the player feeling comfortable getting back out into the field. And I think what happened here is Kevin Stefanski made it easier for Odell. You talk about game planning and preparation, so they knew what they were going to do. But I think part of it is to give the player 2 weeks and you let him work through some things that he needs to do to get back onto the field. As of right now, I'm not overly alarmed. He's still in that window of 9 to 12 months with return to competition after an ACL. But if we get beyond week 3 and we don't have more clarity as to why he's not coming back, then I'm going to start to get more nervous.
Interestingly enough, the Browns are about as balanced a team as there is right now in the NFL. Not only do they throw and run effectively, but when they do throw the ball, they have a lot of different pass catchers to get to. Last week, in terms of routes run, Jarvis Landry led the team with just 26. Donovan Peoples-Jones, 25. Kareem Hunt, 17. Anthony Schwartz, their third-round rookie out of Auburn, 16. David Njoku, 14. Austin Hooper, 13. So, Mike, I think probably the takeaway here is that if we found out he was going to miss 6 weeks, then maybe there was a second wide receiver that could stand to benefit. But for now, I think it probably, and don't spoil all the Jarvis Landry insight yet, probably means Jarvis Landry stays his customarily busy self, and Kareem Hunt probably stays pretty involved in the passing game. But that could happen almost any week as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the interesting wild card here is Donovan Peoples-Jones, right? Because you just went through the pass routes, and he was one behind Jarvis Landry in week 1. He was their number 2 wide receiver, but he only had the one target. Anthony Schwartz, for whatever reason, he would step on the field in 11 personnel, and they would throw it to him. And it didn't really make a lot of sense. It didn't certainly align with the snap count. So I'm keeping an eye on him, maybe for playing DFS in a tournament. You throw a little dart at Peoples-Jones this week in a pretty good matchup against Houston. Schwartz is a guy I put on the end of my bench in a few leagues just to see how it plays out. Maybe his role increases. That was his first game as a third-round rookie, and he had a ton of air yards, actually dominated the air yards in this game. So keeping an eye on the progress of those guys. But to your point, they use a lot of 12 personnel. A lot of guys get the ball to 21 as well with the 2 running backs. They use a fullback, so long-term it's going to be hard for Schwartz and Peoples-Jones to sustain any sort of fantasy value once Beckham's back.
Yeah, and we don't know when Beckham will be back, but the wording yesterday seemed to suggest that week 3 could be in play for OBJ, as Stefania said, still within that 9 to 12-month window. All right, so Devontae Freeman has been promoted from the Ravens practice squad to the active roster. Recently, they released Trenton Cannon, and I don't know, Mike, do you think there is a fantasy fallout to Devontae Freeman being activated to the roster?
Not necessarily, but look, is it possible he comes in and gets 6 to 8 carries and 1 target? Maybe. And if that happens, that's taking away from Tyson Williams. It's taking away from Latavius Murray. Obviously, it hurts their fantasy stock a little bit. So I'm a little nervous about about them going with the three-headed attack, because we already saw it kind of play out in week 1 where Tyson Williams had that really impressive touchdown run, but then, made a mistake and obviously was phased out a bit in the second half. So I'm nervous. This is also not, look, Ravens running backs as a whole will do a ton on the ground, but they're not targeted much. And as a whole, it's not like it's an elite group in terms of total fantasy points, kind of like Cleveland. You don't really see that. So I'm a little nervous if they use 2 or 3 guys that it's not gonna give you a consistent fantasy starter. So I'm nervous, but right now I would want Tyson Williams as a flex option this week, and we'll see how it plays out. Latavius Murray's the first guy I would want on my bench, and then if I'm in a deep league, maybe I'll grab Devontae Freeman just in case. But look, he's 29 now. I don't think he's really been an effective, efficient back since 2017, right? He barely played 2 of the past 3 years. So not too worried about him, but I am worried about just a major committee that hurts the fantasy stock here.
Yeah, my instincts are that both he and Le'Veon Bell are non-factors this year in fantasy, and that eventually, as Mike often tells us, the cream rises, right?
That's
the cream in Baltimore will be both Tyson Williams and also Latavius Murray. Even if they are an imperfect group this year on offense, they still can always run the football effectively. And there'll be some games where they just run the ball, 50 times or whatever, 40 times, and the running backs plus Lamar combined for, 55 fantasy points just on the ground alone. So still optimistic about Tyson Williams. I think this is a note, but not necessarily something that changes my perception of Williams' value, other than if the team feels like those pass protection concerns that have been speculated upon late in the game in week 1 were so egregious that his role could be cut by 20% of the snaps or 30% of the snaps against the Chiefs on Sunday, when they might have to be throwing the football because they are playing from behind. I actually did think that the 49ers claiming Trenton Cannon was sort of interesting. And maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm wrong. But Kyle Shanahan said that he wasn't going to have a 4th running back active who wasn't going to play on special teams. Trenton Cannon was signed by the Ravens because he plays on special teams. He was claimed by the 49ers. I would suppose they don't need extra runners. They need special teams reinforcements. So I wonder if the fact that they claimed Trent Cannon suggests that another healthy scratch could be on the way for Trey Sermon. I don't think JaMychal Hasty, given that he played last week and especially played on 3rd down, but could be kind of interesting to monitor. Like maybe this Trey Sermon absence is longer than we expect.
100% agree. And look, I talked about this a lot the last couple of off seasons. You need to be wary of day 2 and 3 and undrafted rookie running backs. Michael Carter and Trey Sermon were going in the 6th, 7th, 8th round of drafts. I mean, the history of these guys is not great. Generally, what you'll see is really slow start, and then in the second half, they'll start to pick up steam. Think about Cam Akers last year, for example. Jonathan Taylor. I mean, you can go on and on. That's the history of that position. Everyone just kind of assumed they're going to be the guys. You have to be wary of that. So Look, I thought he would be the next guy behind Mostert because that's how they operated all offseason. Even the week leading up to practice, he was running as the 2. So I'm surprised by that. But when these guys disappoint, you should not be shocked. That's why they're late-round flyers, not guys you're taking in the middle rounds of drafts. It's just too risky, and history has told us this time and time again.
When Mike talks, you should be listening. Let's get to Mike's Week 2 wide receiver cornerback matchup piece. It is up now on ESPN.com. You know the premise. Mike highlights the players that have positive or negative cornerback matchups and what it means for the fantasy fallout. So, Mike, the Bears last week faced probably about as difficult of a matchup as you're going to find in terms of cornerback plays in the NFL against the Rams. What's the outlook this week? And specifically, what does it mean for Allen Robinson?
Yeah, it's quite the opposite. Actually, both situations we're going to talk about here, they were on the other list. They were downgrades in week 1. Now they're upgrades here in week 2. So starting with Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney, they're the perimeter wide receivers for the Bears. They're going to go up against Chidobe Awuzie for the Bengals. They brought him over from Dallas in the offseason. And Eli Apple. Now, Trey Waynes is supposed to be that starter. He was out last week with an injury.
Hasn't played since he signed last offseason.
Right, crazy. So he's going to be out again this week for the Bengals. And look, they did struggle in that opener. They won. I mean, they upset the Vikings. That was impressive. But they allowed 22 catches, 250 yards, and 2 touchdowns to Minnesota's wide receivers. Obviously, a terrific duo there. But even KJ Osborne got in on the fun for the Vikings in that game. They allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to receivers. And I know that game went to overtime. Even if you adjust for volume, 6th worst against that position in terms of efficiency in week 1. So it's a problem there. Awuzie struggled, tons of production. I won't get into the numbers there, but Apple, Mike Hilton was heavily targeted in the slot. All 3 guys struggled. And that's notable because Robinson was on the outside 57% of the time in week one. Mooney, 62%. They move these guys all over the field in this offense. So they're going to see all three corners. It's an upgrade situation like the Bears receivers this week.
I believe last week, if I saw the correct numbers, that most of Allen Robinson's targets came opposite of Jalen Ramsey, too, who many consider the preeminent corner in football. So you're going from not just a tough matchup against the Rams in general, but the toughest of matchups against cornerbacks to a much more favorable spot. You've got Robinson inside your top 10, Mike. I am outside my top 10, and it's really nothing to do with Robinson or the matchup. It's probably just that wide receivers are super deep and talented this year that, you get past the usual suspects, the DeAndre Hopkins and the Tyreek Hills and the Stephon Diggs and even Devontae Adams, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like the guys I have between 8 and 10 aren't some slouches. They are equally super-duper stars, whether it's Justin Jefferson or Keenan Allen or players of that caliber, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, but we still all feel like a much better days ahead for Allen Robinson.
Yeah, no doubt, especially in this matchup. The target share is always huge. It was big last week, even in that tough matchup. And again, not the best start, but again, we expected that. You know, he's facing off one of the best defenses in the league, and love that Ramsey role. I mean, the guy is just so good that he plays the star. That's his position. He doesn't play slot corner, perimeter corner, or safety or linebacker. He's just all over the field. They just use him however they need him every week. It's amazing.
Plays football. That guy is
he does play
special.
Football.
So let's go all the way from the Bears-Bengals game to the Bengals-Bears game, as the other side of this matchup looks pretty favorable for our friends in Cincinnati, Mike.
Yeah, again, we were worried about this group in week one. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd had a tough matchup in week one against that Minnesota secondary. Turned out Patrick Peterson played really well. Bashad Breeland on the other side, not so much, which is why Jamar Chase got loose for the long touchdown. Nonetheless, a much better matchup this week against Chicago. Again, they're a work in progress at corner. And in fact, last week when we broke this down and I said, okay, here's the guys we expect to be the top three corners for Chicago as they kind of try to patch this together. 2 of the 3 did not even play a snap in the game. That's how much uncertainty was there.
Crazy.
So you had Jalen Johnson. He was his second rounder last year.
Good player,
he's been solid. Struggled a little bit last year, but starting to, potentially make some progress. Obviously, expect that in year 2. Kendall Vildor was the other one. And then Marquis Christian, who he was basically a reserve safety for the Rams. He's, bounced around a little bit. He manned the slot. He was their top slot corner in week number 1. So, it didn't go well. He allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers in week number 1, 5th most to the slot. Christian struggled. That's where Tyler Boyd is. So a terrific matchup for him. And then on the perimeter, you have Jamar Chase 90% of the time, T. Higgins 69% of the time. They're going to see a lot of Johnson and Vildor. So again, upgrading this group across the board. I know they, Boyd underwhelmed. Higgins kind of underwhelmed. I think he caught a touchdown, right? But otherwise, kind of an underwhelming start. But Jamar Chase obviously looked good. The snaps were good for him. He kind of led every category. So we feel pretty good about this trio going into week 2.
And we know with Cincinnati, under Zach Taylor, they're going to play 3 wide receivers on a vast majority of their snaps. But we had a conversation about Tyler Boyd yesterday on the show because I'm down on Tyler Boyd this week. Matthew has him at 36, so he's not must-starting him, but he definitely has a more optimistic outlook than both you and I do. And part of the reason, the thought process here for me is that, in terms of upside, pretty clearly number 3 in the offense now, right? Both in terms of the type of routes he's running. His air yards per target last week was 6.0. Just for some context, Jamar Chase was 17. Now, I understand one long touchdown pass can sort of skew those numbers a little bit, but it aligns with the kind of player Boyd is versus the kind of player Jamar Chase is. And then 2, and this often goes hand in hand as well, is touchdown upside, right? He's a lot less likely to score a touchdown from the slot. I believe, did you do the study back in the day where it was it showed that slot receivers just have a decidedly lower ceiling for touchdown equity
100%.
Yeah.
So size and role 100% matter. A touchdown's all about opportunity. If you're undersized, coaches, it doesn't mean you're worse at scoring touchdowns. It means that coaches will design plays for bigger players, and history shows that.
Well, how many fades are run to the guy in the slot, right?
Not Tyler Boyd. They go to Chase and Higgins, 100%.
So that's the reason why I'm a little bit lower on Tyler Boyd. I was a little bit lower coming into the season, and he's still a really solid player, Mike, but this is also a team that now has 2 bona fide, or at least, I think, potential stars on the perimeter. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's a great situation. You're right. They'll be top 5 in 3 wide sets. That's fine. But you're right. It's just a bit of a cap ceiling now for Boyd. So I'm with you. I mean, even in the good match, I'm up at 43. I was a little the thing is, we thought maybe Jamar Chase might take a little while to get rolling. Not the case. Yeah. I mean, he came out and played 90% of the snaps, was used heavily. He's a full-on – he's their number 1 right away, right off the bat. So Chase 1, Higgins 2, and I think Boyd now more of a flex option.
it's good when you draft the player number 5 overall and he delivers right away. That's got to feel good for your team.
I have just this one little nugget I want to add on Jamar Chase because I talked to him when I was out there at camp. And, at the time I was asking him what it was like coming in after missing a year of football. And he was talking about having to get reacclimated and how working with Joe Burrow really helped him. But one of the things he also talked about is he was so excited that the time that he took off was the time without fans. Because he said, I've never played without a packed stadium and a ton of fans. And I feel like that helps me. And I kind of wonder if just having that moment in front of a full stadium cheering for him, it felt like old times, and all of a sudden everything clicked. There's a lot, we talk about some of these things, you think, oh, that's kind of silly, it's ancillary. But it's all part of the context of when Jamar Chase was really successful. So I thought it was just really interesting that he had actually mentioned, I don't know if I could really play without fans. I've never done that before. And when did he perform well? As soon as he was in front of a bunch of fans.
Jamar Chase shines under the bright light. Let's see if we can knock out these 2 downgrade matchups as well, Mike, before we get into our game preview. And we'll start with, I don't know who the best cornerback group is collectively in the NFL. I think Miami's up there. Interestingly enough, their slot corner from last year, Noah, who I will not even bother trying to pronounce his last name.
Igbenogany, I think.
Igbenogany is how I say it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it might be 1 or 2 syllables off.
Maybe. Yeah.
But he's a first-round pick last year. Healthy scratch in week 1. Still a dominant group.
No question about it. And it's really about the perimeter, right? Yeah. It's Byron Jones and Xavier Howard. They've spent a big on that position. They have one of the best 1-2 punches in the league. Xavier Howard's been awesome since he got to the league. He just has missed a lot of time with injury, but when he has played, he's been terrific, and he got a bit of a contract extension during the offseason. Obviously, Byron Jones, again, another guy. He was a safety with Dallas. They moved him to corner, and he's been one of the best in the business ever since. So I do expect a shadow situation here. Why? Because when these 2 teams played in Week 17 last year, that's exactly what we saw. You remember Buffalo rested some players late in that game, but you still had 26 routes for Stephon Diggs in that game. So he had a decent sample. Howard shadowed him on every single one of his perimeter routes and most of his routes overall. Diggs did okay in that game. He had 7 for 76, 5 for 55 on 5 targets against Howard. So he had a little bit of success there against Xavier Howard, but it's still a very tough test against one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. Granted, they were playing New England, but Miami did show well against the receivers in week number 1, and Howard was terrific himself. 36 coverage snaps, only allowed 2 catches for 11 yards. So that's Diggs on one side against Howard. And what we also saw in week 1, what we learned was that Gabriel Davis, the clear number 4 for Buffalo. Emmanuel Sanders was right there with Beasley and Diggs in terms of snaps. He's the number 3, really maybe the number 2, certainly the number 2 on the perimeter. So he'll be on the other side of the field against Byron Jones. So a really tough matchup for him. I'm not considering him for my flex. Diggs.
You're playing Diggs.
You're always starting Diggs no matter what the matchup is. The advice here would simply be if you play DFS, maybe you avoid in cash games this week. By the way, Cole Beasley, upgrade in the slot against Nick Needham. If they're not throwing as much to the perimeter guys, he can take advantage against a good matchup inside.
Just quickly on Gabe Davis, Stefania, it sounds like he's dealing with something right now. Do you happen to have any update on that?
I do not.
I think he missed practice on Wednesday. I could be wrong there. Maybe Kyle can check in on that, but it sounds like Gabe Davis missed practice on Wednesday. Don't know the specific ailment why, but keep an eye on that one. Gabe Davis did find the end zone in week 1. He was the only Bill to find the end zone in week 1, as a matter of fact. Another upgrade here, Mike, is an interesting one.
Downgrade.
Downgrade. Sorry. This was interesting. But it's a downgrade, but your ranking suggested to me that it's an upgrade.
Yeah, well, it's we're balancing a few things with Jarvis Landry, right? Okay. Odell Beckham's out, so the volume goes up. And let me speak to that first of all, because, I look back to last season. There were 11 games where Landry played. Odell Beckham did not. In those games, Landry had a 27% target share. That's big time. That's number one. That's huge, right? So, again, he's like Tyler Boyd in that. It's a lot of short area stuff, not always going to stack up touchdowns by any means. Yeah. But when you see a 27% target share and a good offense, it's going to pay off for you in fantasy, and it did. So if you only look at the 9 weeks that fell during the regular season, wide receiver 23. So, I have him. Where's he on my board? He's up there.
Wide receiver 24.
There you go. Right. So he's in that same vicinity. I think that's about where he belongs this week. He does have the tough matchup, though. He's going to face off with Desmond King in the slot. Houston got beat up a little bit last week by wide receivers, but remember, they were blowing out Jacksonville. A lot of garbage time. That kind of plays in there. King did pretty well, though. 45 coverage snaps, 4 catches, 28 yards allowed. The one thing, though, when I wrote this up, I thought Beckham would play. It kind of seemed like he would miss week 1, maybe come back week 2, or at least I was leaning that way. Jarvis Landry was only in the slot 50% of the time last week. So now with Beckham, I thought he'd be inside more with Beckham back. Now with Beckham not playing, he will be probably 50-50 again. So he's not going to see King as much as I thought. It's not that concerning as I would have been if Beckham was playing. So something to think about. At the end of the day, I think you can consider tougher matchup than usual on the inside, fine matchup on the outside, ton of volume coming with no Beckham. I think he's a borderline wide receiver too.
I just got to tell you something that's so impressive about Mike, because I was trusting him to lead me to the right pronunciation. Noah Igbenogany is confirmed.
Nice
Keith Lipscomb,
job.
of course, checks in. Not cool, Keith. Always watching the stream and always keeping us, making sure we are on our P's and Q's. I'm a little bit lower on Jarvis Landry, not because of anything that I disagree with you, Mike, just because of you did weed this into your analysis, is that like not as much touchdown equity. They are so balanced right now in Cleveland. Like certainly the target share was ridiculous last year, but they could also like. Anybody could score a touchdown to the Browns this weekend. It would not surprise me, right? Like there was a play last week at the end of the first half, I think it was, where David Njoku catches this pass, and I was like, I forgot that this dude is like runs a 4.42 or something at 250 pounds. They just have so many weapons in Cleveland that, other than the running backs, I don't know who to start week to week.
Yeah, and Njoku's a name to watch too because he was right there with Austin Hooper. I mean, I was kind of
trade him.
What?
Shouldn't they trade him?
I would like to see that for his upside, but he might have upside now if he's matching Hooper in snaps and running more routes and getting more area. I mean, he
feels like when you pay. I mean, Hooper was at the time the highest paid tight end in NFL history. Now he's, obviously what happens is once one guy gets that crown, somebody else gets signed, and now you've got Kelsey and Kittle and the like, and Mark Andrews, and then Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith and those types. But still, they invested a lot in him. I'm surprised there's still 3 tight ends that matter in Cleveland. I will say this about Jarvis Landry, though. Super impressed by how he looked. I mean, just like in general, I know this guy was obviously dealing with a lot of pain last year, but for a player who's been in the NFL for a while, like he's aging really, really well. Love Jarvis Landry. Bless him always. All right, we're going to come back and talk about the Thursday night football game. But first, did you know that Tony Romo's a motivational speaker now, Daniel?
Didn't.
You did not? How did you not? Did you not pay attention?
I think I must have missed the pre-show meeting.
Wow, Matthew. All this football season, Tony and Corona are remotivating football fans to live the game day good life. Let Tony unlock your football fan potential at romotivation.com. There you can launch an augmented reality experience that will put Tony in your living room or at the bar next to you while you watch the game. It's true, you can be better at watching football. Let Romo and Corona show you how to live the game day good life. Visit romotivation.com now. Please drink responsibly. Corona Extra Beer, imported by Crown Imports in Chicago, Illinois.
Field, you want to get in shape, but you're having trouble staying motivated.
Wow, are you suggesting I'm not?
I'm suggesting you might not be motivated, and I think you should make 5-hour energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost that you need to finally get fit. We all know you sometimes don't want to go to the gym. We can tell by the way that your shirts are a little bit looser around your arms today. Take a 5-hour energy shot to give you the feeling and alertness that you need so you can get to the gym. With 0 sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, cherry, peach mango, and more. Literally flavors for everyone. You can try them all on the site. You even have the option to build your own 12 or 24 pack. You choose the flavors, and it's delivered right to your door. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5, hourenergy.com, you can get some 5-Hour Energy product today. Use our promo code FFF to receive 10% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today.
All right, Daniel, we're back, and we're going to quickly recap Mike's wide receiver cornerback matchups before we get into our Thursday night football. And let's begin here, Mike, with Allen Robinson, who we called him an upgrade facing off against Cincinnati. Darnell Mooney, where'd he go?
Upgrade. Keep him coming.
How about T. Higgins?
Other side of the game, upgrade. I love all them Bengals.
So Bengals and Bears, every wide receiver in that game is an upgrade, is what you're saying.
Maybe a DFS
Mike's
stack
you know what,
situation.
though? This sounds like, Mike, you're like the guy who, like, the first kid who comes to your house for Halloween. Like, your wife specifically bought, like, a certain amount of candy. You got to ration them out. First kid comes, and you're like, here's 4 Snickers bars, right? That's what you're doing here, everybody. You get an upgrade, and you get an upgrade. You get an upgrade.
I buy extra so I can do that.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
This is my first year being a homeowner. I get to have people come by for Halloween.
There you go.
What should I give them?
Lots of candy.
Full-size Snickers bars.
Not apples and bananas.
Okay,
Don't
there
do
we
that.
go. I'm telling you, full is the only way to go. As a kid, I always kept track
full,
of
yeah.
which neighbors were handing out the real.
If you want to
candy
be a
versus-
favorite, it's a good way to get started.
I don't want any Nilla wafers.
Favorite of
and
the
like a
children, not
small-
a favorite of the parents, though.
Nah, the kids are the one that matter.
Yeah,
kids
that's the
rule.
ones that matter. That's
All right, and Mike Stephon Diggs, got to be an upgrader. He's Stephon Diggs, right?
Of course, no downgrade.
Okay, and Emmanuel
Sanders downgrade.
Yeah, all right.
Jarvis Landry downgrade.
Okay, there you have it. There's
There
a
it is.
recap there. 5 upgrades, 3 downgrades for you. Keep in mind this context every single Sunday. We always recap it as well on Fantasy Football Now on Sunday morning. Going to have Mike there. It's always great to have Mike join us for that portion of the show. And now we turn to our Thursday night football game preview. Game preview. The Washington football team is a 3-point favorite, and I love this. The over-under is 40.5 points. I love this stat. I saw it this morning. I thought it was interesting. Apparently the internet does as well. Put it on Twitter. Daniel Jones is 4-0 in his career. Now, actually, let me take that back because some people really don't believe that wins are a quarterback stat. So let me rephrase. The Giants are 4-0 against the Washington football team when Daniel Jones is their starter. The Giants are 0-5 in prime time when Daniel Jones is their starter. Ooh. Something's got to give tonight, right? One of those streaks is coming to an end. Although I did love how 1,000 people commented and replied it's definitely going to be a tie tonight, which it could be. It could be. 40.5 points is the over. But let's get into the Washington side. And Stefania, as somebody who rosters Antonio Gibson in the War Room League, I was a little bit concerned when I saw him on the injury report on Monday, even during a short week. What can you tell us about his game status?
He's off the injury report for the game.
Oh,
and
sweet.
even though Monday was listed as a limited practice, Tuesday and Wednesday were listed as full. But again, in these short weeks, these guys often don't practice, and Washington did not practice for real on Monday or Wednesday, so those were estimations. So probably the notion is that they would have given him less reps to allow him some recovery time, but I don't think you have any worries. By the way, it's his shoulder, nothing about his toe, and that was the big deal injury coming into the season. So I actually took that caught my attention more, that the toe is not even listed any longer.
Okay, so no more toe concern. Shoulder concern is really no concern whatsoever. Mike, he was a player that you were so optimistic about coming into the season. Point totals, not great in week 1, but there were some encouraging signs.
No question about it. The usage was exactly what we were hoping for. 100%. He played 30. Think about this. He was what did he finish? Wide receiver 13. He missed some time last year. Finished running back 13.
Say, oh gosh, yeah.
It would have been good if he was that good.
Is he talking about Terry McLaurin already? Oh my God.
jumping the gun. But look, he missed a few games. We saw a lot of J.D. McKissick and even Peyton Barber last season. He only played 38% of the snaps and was a top 15 fantasy running back. He played 67% in week 1.
Good.
Really good sign. We did not see very much J.D. McKissick. He had 20 carries and 5 targets, a 25% target share in that game. Very low volume passing game for Washington, but nonetheless, 1/4 of the targets went to him, and a lot of that was Taylor Heineke. He started throughout that game. 12th in expected fantasy points at running back. Better days are certainly ahead. And, they're facing off with the Giants. You remember Melvin Gordon running for that long touchdown against them last week. They allowed 146 yards and a rushing touchdown last week. 5.8 yards per carry was highest in the NFL. So the Giants didn't show us that they're a dominant run defense out of the gate anyway. So that's a good sign. You don't want to overreact to 1 week, but nonetheless, Gibson, volume, talent, situation, good defense, keeping them close so he can run the ball plenty. Super pumped for Gibson. He's a top 10 play.
All right. And how about Terry McLaurin, though? Because Terry McLaurin, always good, made an incredible catch last week, the one that went viral, that over-the-shoulder, adjusting near the sideline catch that reminded you just how good Terry McLaurin is. But we went to the poll, and we asked whether our fans were concerned about Terry McLaurin without Ryan Fitzpatrick. And the numbers showed us that 55.1% of people said they are concerned. What? I'll be honest with you, Mike, I'm not really concerned. I said this earlier in the week, and first of all, he's a great player. We always want to trust the talent. But second of all, love Ryan Fitzpatrick. We all do. Mm-hmm. That being said, I don't know that Ryan Fitzpatrick is leaps and bounds better than Taylor Heineke as it pertains to fantasy output, right? He's definitely better, but this is not like going from Ryan Fitzpatrick to where the quarterback play was at the beginning of the season last year in Washington.
Exactly. I mean, he's already played with a lot of quarterbacks who weren't even projected to start this year, right? I've used that Logan Thomas stat. I've thrown it around. I'll mention it here again in a minute when we talk about him, but he hasn't had great quarterback play so far in his career, and he's been a really good fantasy wide receiver. And look, yeah, only 3 targets in week 1. They only ran 22 pass plays. I was just talking about that. It wasn't much of a game where they were throwing the ball very much. He averaged 8.7 per game last year. He has had 5 or more targets in 19 straight games prior to week 1.
Wow.
I mean, that shows you how much of a fluke that was. 19 consecutive games. And we've seen him with Heineke before, right? They played in that playoff game together, 8 targets, 6 catches, 75 yards. So he didn't score, but still delivered the goods, easily could have. If I have a reservation, though, this week, it is his matchup. His wide receiver cornerback matchup is tough. He was on the perimeter just under 70% of the time in week 1. He's going to see James Bradbury and Adoree Jackson. Both of those guys played well in week 1. McLaurin did have good games against the Giants. Both games were pretty good, but he only saw Bradbury some of the time, and of course, Adoree Jackson wasn't on the other side. So it is a tough matchup, and keep in mind, the Giants really good against the perimeter in week 1. Jerry Jeudy came out strong, but he was in the slot.
Yes,
they ended up allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the perimeter. Cortland Sutton, though, lining up outside 31 routes, 1 catch, 14 yards. So that's what makes me a little nervous about McLaurin in this one, but he's a super good player, and the volume will bounce back when they have to throw the ball more.
Speaking of bounce back, big week ahead for Cortland Sutton, in my opinion.
I agree.
You just teased it. Logan Thomas, who cracks all of our top 10. And I get it. It was he had a quiet week last week. He found the end zone, right? But Logan Thomas, am I making that up? Logan Thomas?
I believe he scored, yeah.
But I think he only had 3 targets. Is that correct? I could be wrong there. Kyle can correct me and be like, no, you're completely off. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
It was another low-volume game. You're right. But I'm pretty sure he scored, yeah.
3 targets and a touchdown.
There it is.
3 targets and a touchdown. So low volume, but still made it count because he had 12 fantasy points last week. And tell me the stat that you were just going to mention.
Yeah, so the stat is he had at least one top 10 fantasy week with 4 different quarterbacks last season. One of them was Taylor Heineke. And again, coming into the season, none of those guys were projected starters this season. Heineke, of course, is now. So he impressed with, again, kind of shaky quarterback play. But I'll tell you what, I was doing this is kind of a brief aside on fantasy value, but I was looking at Logan Thomas's history. What a story. I mean,
amazing.
Do you realize he has thrown passes to Larry Fitzgerald? He has caught passes already from Josh Allen and Matt Stafford.
Wow.
I mean, you wouldn't think about that, right? Because he's not. People didn't really know him until last year.
Yeah.
But Josh Allen's only been around a few years. He caught passes from him in Buffalo,
Sure.
Stafford in Detroit. He had time in Arizona as a quarterback. I mean, it's kind of amazing the path he's taken, and now he's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. So, but anyway, again, going back to the game with Heineke last year, 9 targets, 5 catches, 74 yards. This guy never leaves the field. Over the past 11 games, he has played 99% of the snaps, which is pretty incredible. I mean, even
99?
99. Wow. He's always on the field. This guy is fantastic. And also, last week the Giants allowed 10 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown on 13 targets to Denver tight ends. It was the most catches allowed by one team to tight ends last week. So, obviously seems like a good matchup. Again, don't want to get too caught up in sample size. Seems like a good matchup, but a terrific player, and the volume will be there.
All right, let's move to the Giants, and this is where things get really interesting.
Do we have to? Do we have to talk about the
Yeah,
Giants?
we do. But this is important, and I do have, it's not a take, it's just a gut feeling, and I think it's going to probably make some people, I don't know, they might get a little riled up. They might.
That never happens.
If it goes wrong, I might get lots of fan mail, and by fan mail I mean hate tweets, which are basically like the modern version of fan mail. But before we get to that, let's get to the injury updates. And Stefania, there are 2 players of note here for the Giants. Easy one is Evan Ingram, and then second one is Saquon Barkley, who still is on the injury report despite playing last week.
Yeah, so we'll start with Evan Ingram because we know he's already ruled out. That makes it easy, as you say. He has a calf injury that happened in the last preseason game. Obviously didn't play last week. Never really thought he was going to come back in a short week, even though Joe Judge said he is moving around the facility better. So the hope is they can get him back for week 3. But keep in mind, these calf injuries can tend to linger even when they're minor. So we'll keep an eye out for practice next week. As far as Saquon goes, a short week for a guy who you expect that the volume will steadily go up. This isn't the ideal week to see that happen. The Giants did not practice at all this week, so he's listed as a limited participant, but these are just estimations. I think that despite being listed as questionable, we certainly expect him to take the field. I just don't think you're going to see a huge bump up in work, and it's a challenging defense that they're facing, given that this is a short week, and this is really his first test coming off live game action.
And this is my take. I'm sitting Saquon. Okay. I'm sitting him this week. I've got him at 27 in my running back rankings, and that almost felt too high for me. And I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. I by design, have 0 shares of Saquon Barkley this year, but I certainly still had him ranked inside my top 10 running backs. So I hope I am wrong tonight. But if I had the choice, I'm sitting Saquon Barkley. And if you're saying to yourself, like, what would the choice include? Well, maybe if I have Saquon Barkley, I got off to a poor start and I had the top waiver priority and I got Elijah Mitchell. I'd play him over Saquon Barkley. There's an example of somebody. If I have Tyson Williams, I'd play him over Saquon Barkley.
What about
Two guys.
Kareem Hunt.
Playing him over Saquon
What about
Barkley.
Melvin Gordon?
That's close, only because I do think that the long run notwithstanding, like it was a pretty average day. I play Chase Edmonds over him, yeah.
Okay.
But Melvin Gordon's close, but that's sort of the neighborhood that I have him in. Mike, are you more optimistic?
A little bit. I'm looking at our rankings there. I'm at RB19. Look, what we saw last week was, you wanted a little more efficiency, I guess, but it was about as expected, right? He was limited. He played 47% of the snaps, but it was really passing situations where they didn't use him. He handled 2/3 of their carries. So if that game was, a situation where they were ahead, he might have had 15 carries in that game. I mean, maybe they would have just cut him off at 10. It's possible. But nonetheless, he handled 2/3 of the carries. So good sign there. Had 10. He only ran a route on 12 of 39 pass plays. So perhaps they give him a little more routes this week. I would expect the running usage to be similar. The concern for me continues to just be the offensive line, right? He had 0.80 yards before contact, less than a yard before contact. That's a problem. They need to fix that O-line, find some solutions there. I'm not sure if they're going to be able
Shane
to.
Lemieux likely is out tonight, one of their starting guards.
Yeah, and he has struggled badly so far, so I'm not sure that's going to move the needle too much, but we'll obviously.
Hey, it goes from bad to worse, right?
Maybe worse to worse is my thought. But the one thing too though is Washington only allowed one running back target last week. If you had Austin Eckler in your lineup, you know what I'm talking about, because he was not targeted in that game, which was really bizarre. So. We'll see. Good. Obviously, a tough matchup here. He's still coming back. We don't know if his role is going to expand. For me, he's normally going to be a top 5 play right now, more of a borderline back end RB2, we'll say.
I'm out for tonight. And here's the good news. If you follow my advice and we're right together, then you made a smart decision. If you follow my advice and we're wrong, then you're going to be so elated about the fact that you might have a star running back for the rest of the season.
Exactly.
You'll be like,
it's a win-win.
That's
smart.
Yeah.
You thought this through. Yeah, I see what you're doing there.
I know what I'm doing.
I see what you're doing there.
There was an interesting board bet wagered recently. It was between Matthew and Stefania, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was in
and you had Saquon versus Josh Jacobs the rest of the season, and you had Josh Jacobs.
Correct.
Stefania, and he had Saquon Barkley. Mike, if you had to pick one, what would you go with?
I would take Saquon 100%.
Okay, there you have it. Stefania might get a double board bet win then by the end of the season. All right, let's move forward to Sterling Shepard, who was really good last week, Mike. Really, really good. Had 7 catches, 113 yards, and a touchdown. He is now rostered in many more leagues after he was available in 75% of leagues last week. Matchup okay for you? Are you okay with Sterling Shepard in your lineup tonight?
I'm at 47 on my board. I do not like the matchup. He'll draw Kendall Fuller in the slot. He had a little bit of a hard time moving back inside last week. Got beat up a little bit, but he was facing Keenan Allen, so he's a good player.
Makes a lot of people look silly, right? Yeah.
So I think he'll be okay. Shepard was in the slot 69% of the time last week, so it'll be Shepard against Fuller a lot in this game. How about this for a stat? Sterling Shepard, eliminating one game where he left early with an injury, 6+ targets in 27 of his past 28 games.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's unbelievable.
Ridiculous.
The floor he gives you. But it hasn't translated to a lot of fantasy success until his last 3 games. His last 3 games, he's had 23+ fantasy points, starting with the last 2 last year, of course, and then week 1. But he's never finished the season better than fantasy's number 30 scoring receiver. He just with injuries. And again, we were talking about this with Boyd and Landry, a lot of short area targets, not a lot of touchdowns. It just hasn't happened for him for a full season. So I'm a little on the pessimistic side here, especially with Kenny Golladay getting more volume going forward, and eventually Evan Ingram's going to be back, and you would think Kadarius Toney's going to get factored in. So obviously more Saquon Barkley in the passing game. So I'm a little worried about him. I'm not fully bought in yet.
Sterling Shepard, still available in 49% of ESPN leagues. Only rostered in 51% of leagues after the waivers ran. So,
wow,
better than, at least I don't have to write about him this week.
That's
right?
true. That's true. We'll see what happens.
I almost want to institute a rule that if I write about a player 3 times, he is no longer eligible for the waiver wire column because the message is not getting across.
I was going to say,
I have been 37 on my board this week. I'm with you, Mike. So I like the player a lot. Think he certainly was the best wide receiver for the Giants last week, the best pass catcher, the best offensive player for the Giants last week. That being said, you talked about the touchdown equity, like the fact that he's already got 1 in the bank, like there might only be 3 or 5 left for the rest of the season. Second of all, and I'm sorry, and I know the Giants fans, this is a sore subject right now. The quarterback's not good. He just isn't.
Yep.
He turns the football over all the time. He makes questionable decisions. He is not accurate. And I know that you don't need great quarterback play to have fantasy production, right? Blake Bortles during his Jacksonville years was not playing great football and was crushing it for fantasy. I'm just saying, when I'm a wide receiver and I'm dependent upon a quarterback, like Bortles was getting a lot of his production when defenses were playing prevent in the fourth quarter because they were up by 42 points, right? Like the Giants are stingy enough defensively that they're not going to be playing from behind a ton. Washington's not great offensively that I think this is going to be a shootout. Like, I'm nervous about both these Giants wide receivers, Sterling Shepard and Kenny Golladay, who had 10.4 fantasy points last week. Mike, 4 catches, 64 yards. He was fine. Didn't look, but like we've talked about this with Kenny Golladay a lot in the past. A little Jekyll and Hyde, right? Like there have been some peak games, but there's been many more games where it's like right around 10 points or fewer.
Yeah, but when we did last season, well, let's look at 2019. He played the full season. Granted, it was with Matthew Stafford, but he was wide receiver 9 and led the NFL in touchdowns.
I know,
right?
but that was Matthew Stafford.
No question. And then last year, of course, he played, 4 full games and had like the exact same fantasy point total all 4 weeks. And, he was delivering. So, when he's been healthy and on the field, he's been good. And look, I thought he might be more limited in week 1, and that was not the case. It was a good sign. He played 85% of the snaps at 6 targets and 88 air yards, put up 4 for 64. Good start considering how much practice he has missed. So, and that was against a really good Denver defense, by the way. And we should mention that with Daniel Jones, right? If we do expect him to make a leap this year, and it could still happen, he did have a really tough challenge against Denver in week 1. Now is another one here against a really good Washington defense. So we'll see how that kind of plays out.
For the Cowboys game then for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, we'll see. But I hear you. I'm
concerned. I'll just say this. Yeah. Go read what Jordan Renan wrote this morning. Jordan Renan, of course, does a great job covering the Giants. He had a piece out this morning, went out around 9 o'clock. And it was just sort of overviewing why the Giants are more optimistic on Daniel Jones, right? And I get it. Like, there's only so many things you can say about a teammate. But when I'm reading some of the things that they're talking about, like why Daniel Jones is the truth, it's like, yeah, this guy, like, you see the hard work, you see the effort. He cares about football. I'm like, great. So do I. You know what? I was like the worst player on a Division III football team in the NESCAC, right? So, like, my want to did not mean that I was good at football, right? Like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm just a little concerned. I know Giants fans are, and they've got a huge decision to make following this season. They might have to consider a different quarterback. They also, by the way, have 2 first-round picks. All right, let's pick this game. Let's do it.
Can I ask one quick question first?
You can ask 10.
I only want to ask one.
Okay.
But I appreciate the other 9 questions that I will save for later shows.
Yeah, totally.
So it seems very obvious that if you've got one of the wide receivers in tonight's game, Terry McLaurin, probably already in your wide receiver spot because you're starting him, right?
Yep.
When you look at these other Giants wide receivers, at least the way I set my lineup, neither Kenny Golladay or Sterling Shepard are like must-start wide receivers, so I wouldn't necessarily already have them preloaded in that wide receiver slot. I'd probably have them in my flex if I played them last week. I just want to say from a strategy perspective, it makes a lot more sense. Kyle and I were talking about this before the show. Make sure if you're playing one of these Giants to move them into your wide receiver spot to give yourself more flexibility for the Sunday games and the Monday night game so that they're not in the flex. Just as a strategy thought.
Yep. Always keep that in mind. Anytime you have an early game, always use, if it's a flex, if it's a running back you're going to flex, put him in your running back spot. If it's a wide receiver you're going to flex, put him in the wide receiver spot just in case something happens and all of a sudden that flex spot that you had earmarked for a running back needs to go to a wide receiver or something like that.
And Stefania already talked about Evan Ingram, how he's not going to play earlier today. There's no Giants tight end that we're even considering for this game, correct?
No.
Right.
I mean,
good.
Kyle Rudolph got a lot of money. He's a good player. Has been a good player for a long time. But, I mean.
Yeah, 2 tight end leagues. He's not a top 12 play.
Let's pick the game.
Let's pick the game. I will go with, I'll start things off. And Matthew, I know, I'm positive Matthew's listening right now, probably on the ESPN Fantasy Facebook page. I'm going to pick the Washington football team.
Well,
I would go
22.
I'm 22.4, 19.6.
Should I
Clay projection?
Should I give my pick, or should I tell people to go to ESPN Plus and read the playbook, which the preview is up there already with the matchup ratings, the projections, the rankings, analysis, and then tomorrow we'll add every other game for the week. Should I do that, or should I not do that?
Wow.
No,
Don't do
just
that.
give your
Okay.
pick. No, just give your
All right,
pick.
just cut that. This isn't live, right? So
Correct.
we'll just cut that part. Okay. Washington 21, Giants 18.
Okay. That Mike story reminds me of a story that I have to share in a moment.
All right.
Okay.
Stefania?
Washington.
All right, I'm going to take Washington, too. I hate to say it, but it just seems so obvious.
Clean slate, or clean sweep right there. I'll never forget, I went to a graduation speech once. This was like 15 years ago, and they had the student body president come up and address the class. And he was like, I'm going to start off, and he was like, it's a very, very prestigious school. I could come up here and start by telling you about how 52% of the people that are graduating today applied to and were accepted into an Ivy League university, and how 28% of them had a GPA over 4.0, and that the average SAT score was 1490. I could do that. Now, I'm not going to. I was like that. My jaw dropped. I'm like, are you allowed to protest a high school graduation speech? Because I almost did. I was almost like, come on.
Have you ever given one of those speeches? Have you ever given a college or like a commencement speech before?
No, I haven't. Sounds like fun. Have you, Sabrina?
Yeah, I have too.
Wow. USC, their physical therapy program. I gave their graduation speech, and that was back when USC and Miami were, there was actually a real football rivalry there. So
you gave all bad advice.
Yeah.
They haven't been the same.
No, I was trying to make friends. So I was like, and that at that point, USC was clearly outplaying Miami. But I just reminded them that I remembered when they couldn't tie Miami's shoelaces. So
wow.
Wow.
There was a time when that
Daniel,
was true.
you gave one too?
I'll see. I did. Yeah. Well, I was a valedictorian in my class at Full Sail when I graduated from college.
No big deal.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was able to give a speech.
What's a valedictorian?
It means.
Never heard of
Listen, it's a big word.
I know.
We'll talk about it after the show.
You and Mina Kimes.
Yeah, that's the only thing actually Mina and I have in common is that we were both valedictorians. She is far and away better at me than everything else that
She went to Yale, right? At
Yeah,
the school
she was
about an hour
valedictorian
away
in
from
high
Yale.
school.
Yale?
Yale, yeah. It's like 45 minutes south of here. I think that's pronounced right.
I think you got it.
Anyways, let's talk. We're going to come back and talk about rankings in just a second. But first, college football fans, after an off season that felt a little more off than usual, Fansville and Dr. Pepper invite you to celebrate because college football is back, and so are the fans. Yes, it's the most wonderful time of the year again, the season of Saturdays when rivalries run deep and nacho cheese dip runs even deeper. So crack open an ice-cold Dr. Pepper, warm up your cornhole tossing arm, and return to glory with an all-new season of Fansville by Dr. Pepper, the ones fans deserve.
No matter what the sport, be it cornhole or another one, professional leagues go through a rigorous process to select the best athletes for their teams. What if you had the tools to put that type of rigor into your hiring process? Well, you've got them when you use ZipRecruiter. And right now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/06010. So how does ZipRecruiter scout the best and brightest for your team, you ask?
No one knows.
Its matching technology scans resumes across its network of millions of job seekers to find qualified candidates for your open roles, and it proactively presents them to you. Now everyone knows, Field. Then you can easily review recommended candidates and invite your top choices to apply for your job, which encourages them to apply faster. It's no wonder that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And right now you can try ZipRecruiter for free. Just go to the exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/06010. That's ZipRecruiter.com/06010. ZipRecruiter.com/06010. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Field, do you mind if I actually lead us into this and have you guys go back and forth?
Yeah, I'm actually on Google right now trying to figure out what a valedictorian is. So
Oh
go for
my
it.
gosh, stop it. All right. So we wanted to look, excuse me, I was not here yesterday, but you and Matthew went through a bunch of the rankings yesterday. Now that we've got Mike here, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to go through some of the rankings that Mike has that we thought were a little bit notable. First one starting with Ben Roethlisberger. Field, you've got him at quarterback 17, but Mike has him as quarterback 12, a QB1 at the tail end of 12-team leagues. Mike, what is it that you like about Ben this week, and why do you have him so much higher than Field is my question.
Well, he's at home. What do we know about Big Ben at home, right? That still matters.
That still does matter for him.
Last
Weird.
year, 18 touchdowns, 3 picks at home. He was,
Crazy.
again,
Why?
man, I mean,
He's
just-
like one of the best quarterbacks in
I
the past
know.
20
Isn't it
years, and he
crazy?
plays so much better.
It was
at
like
home.
for a long time, that was the thing where he was just average on the road, great at home, and then it kind of, leveled off a little, but it was back last year. It was just his production was better at home. That's obviously one thing. Bit of a tough week one. They were playing at Buffalo. We saw that coming, right? It was not a good matchup. He only ran 55 plays. This was the best thing for me. I was worried they might go to like a run first offense or balanced offense. They were still very pass heavy in week one. We'll see if that carries over to this week. That's adjusted for game script, by the way. And they're facing this Raiders defense, which I'm not convinced on. I thought they did a better job than expected against Baltimore in week number one, and maybe that goes maybe they keep that up. Maybe they're a breakout and all these young guys pan out, which some of them were out last week, healthy scratches, but maybe a few of those guys pan out. The veterans work out. They brought in a ton of guys. Maybe it works out, but I'm not convinced yet. So them playing on the road on a short week at Pittsburgh, I think Big Ben's in for a decent day.
Eye test for me. Thought Ben looked average at best last week. And Buffalo defense is pretty good, right? Like I think we all agree it's got good depth amongst the pass rushers, at least one. It's got an outstanding cornerback in Tre'Davious White, 2 great safeties. So it wasn't like it was an easy matchup. And it was week 1, and there was some weather up there. It was rainy and windy. But eye test for me. And one thing I'll ask Mike. So I've got him at 17. Like I'm out on starting Ben this week.
Yep.
But I will say this. If you're, especially at quarterback, because there are so many good options, even though you have Big Ben at 12, don't you think like it's pretty unlikely he's starting in the 12-team league anyways?
Yeah, I mean, most teams across most people that have a fantasy team did not draft him to be their QB1, and they will start that player that they did draft to be their QB1. Yeah. So it's really if it's a close call. Maybe you waited a quarterback and you have Tua
Matt
and
Ryan
Big Ben
or something.
Yeah, okay. Matt Ryan. I mean, Baker's a fine play this week too at home against Houston, but it's that situation, right? It's really if you waited a bit, it's a decent play for Big Ben. But you're right, you're not starting him over like Kyler or Mahomes or Allen or anybody like that.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, next one I think is fun, Daniel.
Next one is Elijah Mitchell, who I'm really interested in because after.
Can I start?
Go ahead. You start it.
After, sorry to cut you off.
Oh, okay. No, all right, Matthew. Do you want to just start now? Do you just want to go ahead? All right.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Actually, one more thing on Devontae Freeman.
Sean, I was just gonna say. I love it. All right.
So Elijah Mitchell.
Yes. Oh, okay. You want to start this one? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I will say this. I understand. If I had to guess, what the two concerns are for Elijah Mitchell is, one, it's Kyle Shanahan, and for all we know, Trey Sermon could play every snap on Sunday. That's one. Okay. 2 is that he had, I believe, 0 passing game usage on Sunday.
Yes.
So it was
zero targets.
0 targets. I do wonder if some of that is like we weren't necessarily planning on starting him to begin the game. Let's just like make him comfortable, let him do what he's done really, really well. I don't know him to be a deficient or proficient pass catcher. Like I don't know that he's a Christian McCaffrey type or a Gus Edwards type, the two sort of extremes for running backs on the pass catching scale. I think he's sufficient, is what I would say. Now, I did note that JaMychal Hasty was playing a lot of third down snaps this past week. But I don't know, I still have confidence. Really good scheme. The volume's going to be there. It's hard to find both of those things, especially especially right now with running backs that I have. There are some legit questions, whether it's Tampa Bay, whether it's Saquon Barkley, whether it's Damian Harris in New England after a fumble last week. I've got some questions around the running back spot, as usual.
Yeah, and you really nailed the chief concern, which is that we don't know what they're going to do in the backfield, especially if Trey Sermon is active and gets a few touches and looks good, or is it a hasty week? We just don't know for sure. Also, excellent game script for him in week 1. It worked out perfectly. 19 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown. He did play well, but you had a huge lead. They were protecting that lead unsuccessfully for the most part. They almost blew it, but nonetheless, they were trying to run the clock out essentially. So we got a lot of work. That won't necessarily be the case, I don't think, this week after the Eagles played so well in week number 1 in Atlanta. Expect a more competitive game. Maybe they're trailing, and if they are trailing, does he get 10 carries and 1 or 2 targets? And if so, borderline RB2, maybe RB3. I have him projected for 15 carries and 2 targets, and for me, he's 28th on my board. That's where it works out. So I think there's enough concerns. I want to see it more. So for me, he's more of a flex option, again, or a borderline RB2. If you're shaky at that spot and want to start him in the RB2, fine. Also, the Eagles, really good historically, and I say historically, the last few years, with Fletcher Cox up front, they've been outstanding against running backs. They've just shut them down year after year. So Hargrave's terrific. He played well in week 1. So just something to think about there.
Okay. Kenyon Drake. I don't know what to do with Kenyon Drake, right?
I do want to flag something, though.
Okay.
Josh Jacobs did not practice on Wednesday.
Ooh.
Toe and ankle. I don't know if Stefani has any context on that.
No, I mean, I think given the fact that they played Monday night, I wasn't at all surprised by that. I thought that was normal move. And you saw him during the game, actually. I was watching carefully because he had been on the injury report because of his toe. You saw him come out of the game. They were adjusting something in his shoe. I thought Brian Griese actually made a perfect comment about this, which was that a lot of times when you're dealing with a toe issue, they will put an insert. Usually it's like a carbon fiber shank or something that makes your shoe stiffer, but you can lose traction. And Josh Jacobs did look like he was struggling with the shoe, switched to different shoes, and then played better. So I think this was a rest thing, but of course we're going to keep an eye on it.
Yep. Flag it.
So here's a question, and this is, I realize only about one player, but is Kenyon Drake outside that Saquon Barkley line for you?
He is for me. Although, if Josh Jacobs didn't play, he'd be clearly
he would
inside
clearly
of
be
it, which
playing.
we won't know by tonight,
Correct.
obviously.
Yeah, Drake could be an RB1, I think, or very close to it.
yeah.
Borderline top
Super
10
valuable insurance play.
if Jacobs was out. Yeah, they split snaps last week. Now, Jacobs was in and out. He was a little beat up, obviously, but they split snaps 80 snaps almost exactly down the middle. I think actually they probably played a few together.
I think it was 41-39.
41-39 in favor of Jacobs, right? 6
Yeah.
carries, 5 targets, 70 yards for Drake in that game. They're playing the Steelers. Very good defense, but again, game script a potential factor here. If they're trailing, it's Drake. It's Drake. He's the passing down back. We know he's really good in that department. So, you already put together a top 25 week in week 1, playing half the snaps. I think I think he'll be okay. So I think, we're not going crazy here. He's a flex option in PPR.
What a teammate moment that was for me, by the way. Mike was like, yeah, they split the snaps 50-50. I was like, actually, it was 41-39 Josh Jacobs.
Wow.
That's true.
Wow. Like,
Wow.
great
Yeah,
teammate right there.
Throw me under the bus.
Yeah, wow.
Seriously.
I will say this. A lot of the production
all.
came late for Kenyon Drake. It might, but late still counts, whether there's overtime involved or not. And, if I do think this Pittsburgh team gives Las Vegas fits defensively, which I think they will, and I'm not overly confident in Big Ben, as I just stated, but there could be some interesting, there could be a floor play here involved with Kenyon Drake, maybe 10-plus points in fantasy, especially in PPR scoring. All right, Daniel.
Well, I want to ask about the floor play of this next player because Antonio Brown, over his last 4 games, and I realize we've only played 1 game this year, but over his last 4 games, has 25 catches for 387 yards and 5 touchdowns from Tom Brady. That's 23.6 fantasy points per game. Fields, you've got him at 28, and we had a lot of conversation about Antonio Brown this preseason. Mike, you've got him at wide receiver 40 this week.
Okay, first of all, that stat is terrible because half of that came in 1 game where Mike Evans didn't play.
Okay.
So he had
Wow.
a massive game
Mike is
with like
salty
10
this morning.
catches.
Yeah.
Well, I'm salty.
Speaking
You know
of
why I'm
being
salty?
great teammates.
You know why I'm salty about this?
Here I am
Let's
taking
talk
my own
about-
self flack about being a
because-
bad teammate. Mike is just here, just dominating Daniel. What the heck?
Yeah, so this is why I'm salty because last Thursday we sat in the same chair, talked about this game, and I was like, you were like, Antonio Brown's the best value in drafts this year. And I'm like, I'm a little more pessimistic, I'm a little lower. So what happened? He had a big game, and Twitter was alive and well. And I'm completely wrong on Brown. Everything, the whole season's over. It was the ultimate, 1-game overreaction. The guy had, 5-6 targets in that game. So, but here's my case on Brown. Look, he was still the clear number 3 receiver in that game. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were way ahead in terms of snaps, targets, routes, you name it. Godwin obviously had a huge game. And Evans was shadowed by Trevon Diggs, by the way. He played terrific ball. He had the toughest matchup, and it showed up, obviously, in the stat line. And, again, we can go back to last year. If you look at the 10 games, if you don't just pick the game where Mike Evans was out, Daniel Dobb.
I didn't. I picked 4 games, but that's fine. You're
But,
right.
yeah, it's even worse, a small sample. Anyway, if you look at the 10 games they all played together, in terms of fantasy points per game, Evans wide receiver 10, Godwin 28, Brown was 38.
That
by the
doesn't
way,
mean anything to me. Can I tell you why?
and no, I'm not done
Roommates.
yet. One more. Past 8 games for Antonio Brown, including covering those games you're talking about, other than the one Evans missed, 5.0 targets per game.
I don't-
Last 8 games. That bothers me. That lack of volume concerns me a little bit.
This is very much like one of those gut calls.
Daniel. It's
Like,
guts,
and,
baby.
and I feel the same way that you feel, Field, where it's like Tom Brady loves this guy so much, even though I'm like, whatever. But Tom Brady's the one that's getting him the football, and because he's put so much energy and effort of his own personal, emotional, and mental energy into him, I just feel like there's something more there with Antonio Brown.
I'm with you, Daniel. I've had him at 20. You got him at 25. Matthew has him at 20. All right.
Yeah.
So Matthew is super optimistic there.
I mean, Chris Godwin doubled him in targets. So
You're not wrong. Mike, you are not at all
saying.
wrong.
No, I know. This is all the numbers tell us something sometimes, and then sometimes you just trust in your gut. And in many cases, Mike's numbers are absolutely correct. Sometimes the gut call works out. The gut call is once again in play for Antonio Brown facing off against the Falcons this week. I think Tom Brady could have 19 touchdowns in this game.
That's true. It is a good matchup.
Yeah.
I'm going to hedge a little. I'm hedging.
I'll hedge a little.
Anything else, Daniel? We're good.
No, that's good. Let's wrap
All
it up.
right.
We got, you know what? We have a DFS podcast
Yes, we
that's
right.
going to follow this. So if you haven't dipped your toe in the DFS waters, make sure you do that.
It's awesome. It's a must listen every week. Mike, Daniel, Smiz, Al Smizzle, Al Zeidenfeld, all awesome. Tomorrow we come back with not just a recap of Thursday Night Football, but previewing everything for the weekend ahead, which means Stefania, who, by the way, check her out on Sports Nation on ESPN Plus. Saved by the Bell.
Thank
Must
you, Phil.
see TV. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. For Mike, Stefania, Daniel, on Field, peace out.